as NATO leaders prepare to meet in Lithuania.
We're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked across the board.
Also tonight, a Canadian wins a notoriously difficult stage in cycling's Tour de France.
I've always talked about winning a stage at the Tour de France, and I finally achieved it.
And
we are enjoying a lot the city just because we feel like we do not have these kind of events in Mexico.
Fun games, spectacle, everything. Music, cowboys.
The world comes to Canada for the greatest outdoor show on earth, the Calgary Stampede. That's later, but first. The week ahead is expected to be pivotal for the war in Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden has arrived in the UK for a quick visit with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak ahead of the NATO summit later this week. The two leaders are expected to smooth over their differences regarding the U.S. decision to send controversial weapons to Ukraine. Katie Simpson reports from Washington.
U.S. President Joe Biden climbed aboard Air Force One, embarking on what is expected to be a critical overseas mission. A series of meetings with allies and NATO leaders at a time when divisions over how to best help Ukraine are starting to show.
We're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked across the board.
Biden is prepared to defend his decision to arm Ukraine with cluster munitions, despite public objections from some allies. The deadly weapons pose a risk to civilians since they drop hundreds of small bombs which don't always explode immediately and can detonate years later.
The UK is signatory to a convention which prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions and discourages their use.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the UK is on the growing list of countries against this move, which also includes Canada, New Zealand, Spain, and the UN Human Rights Office.
We will not use it in civilian populated areas.
Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, says assurances have been given to the Biden administration that public safety will be a priority. In addition to saying cluster munitions won't be used in civilian areas, she says demining crews will be deployed to ensure no explosives are left behind. She welcomes the decision, hoping it will speed up the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
There is nothing worse than tortures, rapes, and everything that Russians do on the territories they occupy, and we need to liberate as quick as possible.
While Ukraine has been successful in its push to get more weapons, it's unlikely to secure an even bigger ask, an invitation into NATO.
I don't think it's ready for membership in NATO. But
President Biden says he won't likely consider a change in position until the war is over, arguing that if Ukraine joined now, it would expand the conflict under what's called Article 5, the founding NATO principle that says an attack on one is an attack on all.
If the war is going on, then we're all in a war. We're at war with Russia, if that were the case. So I think we have to lay out a path, for the rational path, for Ukraine to be able to qualify to get into NATO.
Ukraine has consistently made requests of allies, particularly for military support, which at first have been resisted, but after months of persistent lobbying are ultimately granted. Think planes and tanks. While the NATO request is different, Ukraine is pushing ahead, hoping the same tactics will work. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
As you heard in Katie's story, Ukraine is keeping up the pressure on NATO to let it join. One source of tension among NATO allies seems to be settled. They've reportedly struck a deal on defense spending, though it's not clear if countries like Canada can meet the goal. Murray Brewster has more on that.
I think that some of our allies are getting frustrated, a bit tired of us.
Carrie Buck is Canada's former ambassador to NATO, talking about the expectation of member states to spend 2% of their GDP on defense.
I actually think that the 2% guide or goal is a bit of a distraction. I'm not saying we don't need to spend more on defense. We absolutely do. But what's more important is filling in the capability gaps through procurement that is faster and more targeted to what Canada needs as a member of NATO.
It's almost a given that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will face pressure from allies to meet NATO's newly revised goal. Right now, Canada spends 1.29% of its GDP on the military.
Either way you cut it, we're not there yet. Canada's not there yet. So they'll be expecting us to say something more on defense spending.
Canada committed in 2014 to having a plan to reach 2% by 2024, but has been deliberately ambiguous on how it's getting there. Coincidentally, NATO leaders overall have been ambiguous about the other major issue expected to dominate the summit: whether Ukraine finally gets to see a roadmap to join the Western military alliance. Orisia Lutsievich of the UK-based Chatham House says NATO is at an historic crossroads.
It is coming at the time when we understand that this strategic ambiguity that started in Bucharest in 2008, kind of a permanent waiting room for future NATO members, including Ukraine and Georgia, has actually contributed to a wrong signaling in Kremlin.
Moscow used Kyiv's intention to join NATO and the EU as justification for the invasion of Ukraine.
So we have to put an end to this and send a very strong signal that Ukraine and Georgia belong to the transatlantic community of collective security.
Britain's top military commander, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, last week told the UK Parliament Russia has lost nearly half of its combat capability in Ukraine. His testimony came on the heels of the recent mutiny by the Russian private security contractor, the Wagner Group.
The recent events in Russia, I think, puts Putin in a relatively weak position and his regime in disarray.
Seth Jones is with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington.
Russia's in a position of some weakness right now, which I think does raise some prospects about to what degree NATO can take advantage of this.
Jones says Russia is learning from its experience in Ukraine and planning to rebuild its army on a bigger scale, along the lines of the old Soviet Union. And that poses a challenge for NATO leaders to consider over the long term. How do they deter a wounded but unbroken Kremlin? Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
After 5 days of silence, talks between the two sides in BC's port strike have resumed. The BC Maritime Employers Association says it has met with representatives of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Canada. They say they proposed setting up a committee and bringing in an independent arbitrator. 7,400 port workers walked off the job on Canada Day, shutting down 30 ports, including Canada's busiest in Vancouver. Issues on the table include wages, contracting out, and automation. In Toronto's East End, residents are leaving flowers on the sidewalk, paying their respects to the woman killed in a shocking daylight shooting Friday afternoon. Furkan Khan has the latest.
I was inside of the shop with some of the staff members and somebody just started to yell, "Shooter."
Sarah Dees was in her East Toronto shop Friday afternoon when the gunshots rang out. After taking cover and waiting for things to calm down, Dees and her staff saw a woman lying on the ground outside. They grabbed a first aid kit and ran towards her.
Everyone was just kind of like confused and panicked and didn't really know what to make sense of it all. You could see just like a small amount of blood and like a little red dot on the side of her dress. And at that point, she was breathing.
That woman was Carolina Hubner-Makurat. Police say 3 men were in an altercation when things escalated, and 2 of them took out handguns and started firing. Hubner-Makurat was hit by a stray bullet. She was taken to the hospital where she died. Still reeling with the shock of the event, Dees is worried about the safety of her neighborhood.
Clearly, there's a lot happening all over the city. The reality is there's a ton of violence going on, and we need to keep everyone as safe as possible.
The suspects fled the area. Police are asking for the public's assistance in finding and identifying them. Irvin Waller is an emeritus professor at the University of Ottawa and studies violence prevention. He says shootings like these are uncommon in Canada, but
they are always a risk when people are shooting each other with handguns. Handguns are not easy to direct.
Waller says Toronto can also learn from other cities that have reduced street violence.
So I would like to see Toronto spend $50 million and get smart on crime, use the things that have worked elsewhere, have a good plan, and actually set targets.
Carolina Hubner-Makurat was a mother of 2 daughters. Her husband, Adrian Makurat, expressed his grief on Facebook, calling Friday a tragic day. A GoFundMe page has been set up to support the family. Furkan Khan, CBC News, Toronto.
Team Canada has unveiled its roster for the FIFA Women's World Cup. There is a mix of new and familiar faces, many of whom won gold for Canada at the Tokyo Olympic Games 2 years ago. Captain Christine Sinclair will make her 6th World Cup appearance, while 18-year-old Olivia Smith makes her first. But midfielder Desiree Scott, also known as the Destroyer, didn't make the cut because of a knee injury. CBC Sports contributor Shireen Ahmed tells us what to expect from Canada in this soccer tournament.
Canada's women's team is in Group B, the group of death. But I do want to point out that it is called the group of death because Canada is in it. It'll be some tough battles coming right out of the gate, but the team is mentally preparing for that. And I think we'll see hopefully a good finish from this team.
The FIFA Women's World Cup kicks off later this month in Australia and New Zealand. Canada's first match is against Nigeria on July 20th. Meanwhile, Canadian cyclist Michael Woods is celebrating his biggest career victory tonight. The 36-year-old captured his first Tour de France stage win, and in dramatic fashion, no less. Woods took the lead in the last few hundred meters up the steep, spiraling path of a dormant volcano. Susanna De Silva has more on his epic win.
And Michael Woods now goes for the stage win for Canada.
Making history at a historic stage of the Tour de France, Ottawa's Michael Woods doing something only 2 other Canadians have done.
Proud, really happy. I'm on cloud 9 right now.
The 36-year-old says he is savoring the moment after a remarkable climb at the end to reach the summit of a volcanic crater in south-central France, not used in the Tour for more than 3 decades. Woods' career has also been a tough climb. He initially wanted to be a hockey player, then found running, setting 2 national Canadian junior records until injuries sidelined him.
Working at a running shoe store in Ottawa and also working at a bank, and not really sure what I was going to do with my life. But my parents were really great and bought me a bike, and I started just riding a bike just to stay in shape and maintain my mental sanity.
Eventually, he landed with his current cycling team, Israel Premier Tech, which is co-owned by a Canadian company. And despite being one of the older riders, he came out on top.
It's fantastic for Canadian cycling, for Mike Woods, for the Canadian-based team.
Canadian Alex Sita was the first North American to wear the yellow jersey during a Tour de France. He says Woods' running background gives him an advantage in climbs like today's and could for other stages still to come.
So when he stands up on the pedals out of the saddle and accelerates, it's almost like a running motion on his bike. And that's the best place for him to be.
Last year, one of Woods' teammates also won a stage, becoming only the second Canadian to do it after Steve Bauer in 1988.
Especially Woodsy at his age, at 36, I always say the old guy's got it going on.
Vancouver bike shop owner Simon Coots says a Canadian victory is bound to inspire others.
If someone does well, or if they're watching it, they want to get out on their bike, they want to get a new bike, they want to get all the road cycling gear, the glasses, the helmet, whatever, the shoes. Yeah, it gets people excited, and then they're just spending money, and they get excited, they get blood rushing through their veins, and they all want to compete.
Luckily for Woods, tomorrow is a rest day.
We'll have some nice champagne tonight and get back at it.
Before he tackles the final 12 stages, he is well back of the leader, but still hopes to cross another finish line first. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
France has banned the sale, possession, and transport of fireworks ahead of Bastille Day next weekend. Fireworks are often used during protests in France, and this ban comes after several nights of riots triggered by the police killing of a 17-year-old boy of Algerian descent. Caught up in the chaos have been many French schools. In all, 243 schools have been burnt or damaged. John Lawrenson went to a small town west of Paris where 2 schools have been so badly damaged they'll have to be demolished.
The first thing you notice are dark stains on the road where rioters set fire to trash cans. Next, you pick up the acrid smell of a fire that's burnt itself out. Then you see it. The charred remains of a fire-gutted school that looks like a scene from a war. In fact, you'd only know it was a school because of the coloured squares of a hopscotch game marked out on the concrete in front of it. La Verrière's mayor, Nicolas Dainville, recounts what happened here.
On avait près d'une centaine de jeunes.
There were about 100 young people, all dressed in black, some of them carrying iron bars and jerry cans of gasoline, highly organized, as if for a military operation, and they attacked what was perhaps the most beautiful thing in this neighborhood, its schools.
Criminels, cruels, à ce qu'il y avait peut-être de plus beau dans le quartier.
Bonjour. Il arrive, les garçons, ils arrivent, David.
A father picks up his children at a daycare centre. Most of the kids here are among the 170 whose schools have been burnt down.
Nous, on n'a rien fait du tout. Moi, j'étais en train de...
We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't deserve to have our school burnt. Me and my brother and sister were sleeping, but my parents woke up and went to see what was happening. Later, when my brother showed me a film of it on the telephone, I couldn't believe it.
J'étais étonnée. J'avoue, ça me fait de la peine parce que ils sont pas à brûler cette école. It's painful. They should not have burnt the school, but it's the fault of the police. If they had not killed Naël, the schools wouldn't have burnt. Nothing would have burnt. Rien se serait brûlé en fait.
C'est vrai, les garçons?
It's a shock for the parents as well.
C'est une catastrophe, c'est vraiment, ça n'a aucun sens.
It's a catastrophe. It makes no sense. I don't understand why they attacked our schools. It hurts the whole town even, because education is the most important thing, and this is going to impact the lives of all our children.
C'est le plus important et maintenant ça impacte tous nos enfants.
Moi déjà, il faut punir les parents et le gouvernement français qui nous...
The parents of the kids who did this should be punished, and the government as well, because they are not up to the job. If that police officer did something wrong, he should be judged, but that's no excuse for smashing and burning.
The mayor says it'll take 3 years to rebuild the schools at a cost of about $29 million. John Lawrenson, La Verrière, France.
Multiple countries are renewing efforts to bring an end to the violence that has taken over Sudan. This week, Egypt is planning to host a summit of Sudan's neighbors to discuss solutions, while the U.S. will send a senior diplomat to Ethiopia to meet with Sudanese civilians. It comes as Sudan sees one of the deadliest attacks since the fighting began between the military and a rival paramilitary group. A video shared on social media by Sudan's health ministry shows what appears to be victims of an airstrike on Saturday. The strike killed at least 22 people in a neighborhood northwest of the capital, Khartoum. Many of the victims include women and children. The military and paramilitary groups blame each other for the attack. Since the violence broke out in April, hundreds have been killed and nearly 3 million people have fled their homes. To India now, where some historians and educators are outraged over changes to high school textbooks. More than 30 academics are disowning textbooks they wrote and asking to have their names taken off because they say key historical facts have been removed. Critics believe the ruling party is trying to mold the history curriculum to fit its ideological agenda. Salima Shivji reports.
There have been deletions around chapters of democracy and diversity.
It's a book he knows very well. Manish Jain, a professor in the Department of Education Studies at Delhi's Ambedkar University, was part of the team of scholars who drafted the high school political science textbook years ago. But now he wants nothing to do with it. That's because of changes made unilaterally, he says.
What should be given to our youth and young is being denied. So that's the pain. It is not about our names. It is about what could be possible.
Jain and more than 30 other professors penned an open letter asking for their names to be removed from the textbook's credits after key chapters were deleted. Two of the authors in another scathing letter wrote that the books were once the source of pride for them, but are now a source of embarrassment. Jain agrees.
Don't claim that this is being done on our behalf, as we say, not in our name.
It's a textbook that's been used for years in more than 20,000 schools across India and countless tutoring classes like this one. But the changes made quietly by an independent body under India's Federal Education Ministry have fueled accusations of the government wishing to erase history to further a specific ideological view. Jane says it's political.
An entire section on Gujarat riots has been deleted. Now we know in the context of the present regime, what does Gujarat riot 2002 mean?
The deadly communal riots that killed hundreds of Muslims are a touchy subject for the current BJP government. They happened under Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's watch, when he was the state's top leader. Other topics dropped are a chapter on Mughal history when a Muslim dynasty ruled over India, and paragraphs on attempts by extreme Hindu nationalists to assassinate Mahatma Gandhi. In science manuals, notions like the theory of evolution have been moved to higher grades. Controversies over edits to textbooks are not new in India. It's happened before under different governments. This time, the group in charge of the changes defended the move, saying it's not about content. It's a way to help lighten the academic workload for students swamped after the pandemic. Gitanjali Shukla, who's been tutoring this after-school class of a dozen students for the past year using the old version of the textbook, thinks the changes are reasonable.
Mughals are overrepresented in our history books, and to avoid that repetition, they have removed few chapters which will help students because the content is reduced.
But that argument leaves Jane and other professors dejected. He doesn't think the changes will be reversed. Still, the professor says he has no regrets about speaking out.
Saying that we do feel perturbed is also a responsibility as a teacher, as a citizen.
And as a parent, wanting his school-aged kids to get an accurate account of a not-so-distant past. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Mumbai.
A Northern Alberta First Nation is working to have babies delivered in the community for the first time in decades. The CBC's Ariel Fournier visited the inaugural birthing camp.
In the bush on the Kihiwan Cree Nation, parents cradle their babies and elders laugh and sit by the fire, next to a lodge made from poplar branches. In a ceremony by the lake, 4 families bury their babies' placentas.
When we do that, the kid is grounded and is really with Mother Earth.
Elder Doreen Musapeo hadn't performed this ceremony for decades, but 2 years ago she reintroduced it for her granddaughter.
And then I always remember the grandma saying, one day you have to do it. You can't run to somebody.
These children now have a piece of themselves in the land, but they were all born at a hospital outside of their nation. Kihiwan is planning to change that.
I want for them to have baby at home, in Kihiwan, where they're from.
Jody Gadwa Cardinal is studying to become a midwife. She was a doula for her nieces and nephews when their children were born.
It's such a sacred experience for mom and baby.
But for many communities, these traditions have been completely stripped away. Robin Thrones is at this birthing camp. She's also training to become a midwife in the Opaskwayak Cree Nation in Manitoba. For years, the Canadian medical system wouldn't allow traditional birthing practices, like taking a placenta home or smudging in the hospital. She's asked elders about what it was like decades ago when the community had midwives.
Some of them say that they just have lost most of those teachings, so we're having a tough time.
The midwives in training are part of a pilot program funded by the federal government. They came to this camp to help bring those ceremonies back. But even here, shame and abuse has made it difficult for some women to talk about their bodies.
This one elder said, Gaius, why can't I just say it?
Anthony Johnson is the director of that program. He was struck by the experience when the camp gave space for elders to say a word like vagina out loud.
That opened up this larger conversation around how do we heal from residential school? How do we heal? And that's the power of this work.
Words are also an important part of the birth ceremony itself. Gadwa Cardinal sang to her grandchildren in Cree as they were born.
Baby hears the language from the Cookums right away so that he knows, this is where he belongs, this is your family, and this is who you are.
The pilot program means on-reserve communities in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta would have babies delivered at home for the first time in generations. Ariel Fournier, CBC News, Kihiwan.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Starting Mondays, you can download a special curated edition of the program featuring our favorite stories from the weekend. Shetland is a small archipelago north of Great Britain, known mostly for ponies, sheepdogs, and murder. The fictional kind. At the Shetland Noir Literary Convention, crime fiction writers and their fans come together for readings, workshops, and discussions of dastardly deeds. Freelance reporter Dawn Genova visited the islands and brings us this report.
There were several sets of footprints. The moon made sharp shadows of them. I made a print of my own for comparison. Yes.
Marcely Taylor reads from one of her latest mysteries, set on the islands where she lives. She's also one of the organizers of Shetland Noir.
I think my official title is curator, but I seem to be everywhere.
It's a major undertaking bringing people here. A ferry to Shetland from the Scottish mainland takes about 13 hours across open ocean, and flights are expensive. Yet the festival still attracts authors and fans from around the world.
But then you travel to something like this and you realize that actually your struggles and your triumphs are not just yours.
That's Lisa de Nicolitz of Toronto, one of 3 Canadian authors at Shetland Noir who all took part in lively panels talking about their craft. Sherry LaPena, also from Toronto, feels coming here is an essential part of spreading the word about Canadian crime fiction.
You feel more part of a global thing,
Yes,
right? I think
yes.
in Canada, there's a problem with, feeling just Canadian and small on the world stage.
Yeah.
And I think if you're a crime writer, you have to think globally.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So when you come to things like this, you feel part of a bigger global crime picture.
The universality of crime stories was also praised by the festival's main attraction, Richard Osman. The author of the Thursday Murder Club series was stranded in London by a cancelled flight, so he appeared by Zoom instead.
I love that you can tell human stories in crime. I love that you can tell the stories of your country in crime. I love that every country in the world has incredibly rich veins of crime writing.
More people are visiting Shetland these days thanks to renowned British crime writer Anne Cleeves. Her 8 Shetland crime novels and their TV adaptations have made the islands a bucket list destination, says Marcely Taylor.
Yes, absolutely. Anne has made the islands popular, a tourist go-to destination. Instead of where, you really want to go there?
For crime fiction junkies, the chance to rub elbows with their favorite writers, pick up some writing tips, and even learn a traditional Scottish folk dance makes this a once-in-a-lifetime trip. So, it's no mystery why hundreds of people made the difficult trek to Shetland. Dawn Genova for CBC News, the Shetland Islands.
Lord Huron with Ends of the Earth. The band from California is playing Calgary tonight at the Stampede. This year's huge lineup really runs the musical gamut. Of course, there's plenty of country, like Regina's JoJo Mason. But there's a whole lot more. Everyone from Tegan and Sarah, who are actually from Calgary, to people like Pitbull. This year's Stampede has already been declared a success. Under sunny skies and near 30-degree temperatures, an all-time day one attendance record was set on Friday, with 164,939 people entering the grounds. They're coming not just for the music, but the rodeo, the midway, the powwow, the pride events, the politicians flipping pancakes. Some festival goers say there's good energy in the air.
I feel like this year is a good year. Everyone's involved, and it's been a long couple of years, so this one feels real. This one feels like we're back at it.
Visitors from far and wide are experiencing the best the Stampede has to offer.
We live in Hawaii, and we decided to take a vacation and come here for the Stampede and visit our friends and we're so glad we did. We came from Cancun, Mexico. I have here with my family, all my Mexican friends, and well, we are enjoying a lot the city.
Oh, fun games, spectacle, everything, music, cowboys.
Organizers think it's possible attendance will beat last year's 1.2 million. We'll see if it tops the all-time record of 1.4 million that was set on the Stampede Centennial in 2012. We'll leave you with another of the artists playing at the greatest outdoor show on earth tonight, Toronto's Jessie Reyes. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.